morning. You're on the trail again with Marvin L. Storm, and so we're going to chat a little bit today about several topics that I have been thinking about lately. One is the value of equity in a company and why founders and companies give away equity. And as I've thought about this, one of the things that really sort of interests me is founders really try to hold on to equity. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Shark Tank. I've watched, some of the episodes on Shark Tank, and I find it really interesting of how, they come in, the founders and entrepreneurs come in, and they talk a little bit about what their value proposition is, what they hope to accomplish. And during this process, they say they want $500,000 for 8% of their company or 10% or whatever that number is. And they really try to hang on to that equity. And as I've thought about this, and recently I had a conversation with the founder, actually three founders, co-founders of a company that they were considering bringing in outside capital. And they were chatting with me about, kind of at a board level discussion of what type of equity should be granted. And I said, you're really asking the wrong question on what type of equity should be granted. I said, you really need to look at equity from the perspective of what is going to be the return on that equity. What do you hope to accomplish with that equity? You should never give up equity for anything if you aren't going to get more value for the equity that you granted than the value of whomever that is, whether it's capital that you're looking at for someone to value the company at. That means you raise $1 million or whatever the number is, and you grant equity from to that entity or individual that provided equity. Is the capital that you got for that equity you granted going to be greater than the value that you got for the capital that you received? If you got $1 million, is the return on that $1 million that you granted going to make the pie bigger? Years ago, early in my career, I was talking about someone, and we were talking about him becoming a part of the company and me and bringing him in, and he said, you're looking at it all wrong. Would you rather have, and I'm sure you've all heard this, would you rather have a small piece of a big pie or a big piece of a very small pie? So another way to put that is do you want to have 1% of Amazon or Microsoft or Apple, or do you want to have 99% of No Name Inc.? So that's how I think you should look at, equity and the granting of equity. I think you should look at it from the perspective of what am I going to get in return for whatever I'm getting. So if you're looking for capital, the capital you bring in, that $1 million that you bring in or whatever that number is, are you going to be able to grow the pie bigger? Are you going to be able to look at that and be able to see that return on investment, that pie will become not really $2 million, but is it going to become $10 million? And so you granted $1 million and got $10 million in return. That's how I think you need to look at equity. And so if you're looking at employees, for example, when you grant stock options to employees, are you looking at getting for the value of that employee? Are you looking at him for the 2-3% of shares that he gets of your company? Is that going to return to you, 5, 10, 20, 50% return on the equity that you grant them? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't give equity because the return is just not going to be there. However, if you look at multiplying and leveraging the resources of the people that you bring in and make part of your team, then you should grant equity. In fact, you should run to beg them to take equity because your 30, 40, 50, 70, 80% of the company that you own is going to grow exponentially. And that's how I think you need to look at equity. Because the equity discussion is always, a contention point when you're talking to founders and entrepreneurs that they want to keep as much equity in the company as they can. You know, whether you decide to fund your company or grow your company by taking on debt, you know, in the ideal world, you would never give away any equity. You would borrow everything, use cash flow, free cash flow to pay that back, and that you would be able to, you know, retain 100% of your company. In most cases, that's probably not a great idea because you need not only the equity and the resources, whether it's capital or whether it's human resources or whether it's advisory or input and share, you need that additional information. So I've often heard the word that, you know, there's smart capital and there's dumb capital. You know, smart capital is where you raise money and you get advisors, you get input, you get experience, you get guidance. And you know, the individuals that put in that money are able to provide, you know, insight to you that you haven't had. That's smart money. Dumb money is they just lend you the money and let you do whatever you want and hope that you have enough moxie to grow the company. So as we look at the types of issues surrounding equity, I kind of want to make the point that you should almost want to give up equity. If the equity is going to leverage and give you more in return than you give that equity out. So if you gave $1, are you going to get $2, $10, $100 back? Anyone will tell you if I could give you $1 and a year or two, 5 years, you give me $10 back, that was a good deal. That's how you need to look at equity. If you give out 1% and 10 years later, that 1% is going to turn into 10% and turn your 80%, you know, $1 million into 10 million or $50 million, then that's why you want to give equity. So that's my thoughts for today as we kind of wrap this episode up. So I just want to tell you that this is one of the concepts that's kind of difficult to have chats when you're talking about giving away equity. And what I really want you to think about is why give away equity and what is the return on that equity going to be. This is Marvin L. Storm, and we'll see you on our next episode.